Good morning and welcome to KidSketch, a program sponsored by the San Diego Architectural Foundation and BEEP, Built Environment Educational Program. My name is Mike Stepner. I'm a former faculty member at the New School of Architecture behind us. I'm also a former city architect and planning director for the city of San Diego. And this morning we're going to talk about sketching in an urban context. How it's important to observe what's going on around you as a cue to the design of a building or a new project, but also to see how things fit and understand how a neighborhood works. So today we'll be sketching some buildings along Park Boulevard in downtown San Diego, and we'll see how it all comes out, and Kurt Hunker will be showing us how best to record and observe what we see on the street.
Good morning, I'm Kurt Hunker, professor of architecture at the New School of Architecture and Design and a longtime colleague of Mike Stepner, and I'm here today to do the sketching. So you'll notice right away a few things different than the usual KidSketch session. One, as Mike pointed out, we're in the urban environment. Secondly, I'm not Laura. And thirdly, as you'll see, I have a very different kind of sketch technique, and we're going to be sketching quickly in the urban environment today.
We're looking at downtown San Diego, the East Village section. Downtown has changed tremendously over the last 30, 40 years as new development has occurred and new projects have gone in and people have moved back downtown and shops have opened, schools have opened. And we're looking at this whole area from the air. I think the important thing about what we're going to do this morning is we're going to look at it from the ground. We're going to look at it from street level, where all the activity really is, and how we observe what goes on the street and what makes really a street life and a neighborhood important, and what makes it function is what kind of activities there are, who's walking around, when you can go shopping, where you can walk to your home. All these things are important, but right now we're looking at it from the sky to give you a broad overview of what's there. And then we're going to zoom in on Park Boulevard and look at some buildings and talk about how we can observe those and record them in our sketches.
We're going to talk about the street wall and how buildings fit on the street. The importance of doing all this is as a cue to how you design a building and a space. Louis Kahn, the great architect, talked about the street as shared space, or a street as a room by agreement. So the first 30 feet we look at is important, and sketching gives us the ability to observe how all that works. The first 30 feet is the height of the building from the curb and the sidewalk, the 30 feet out from the curb, and the 30 feet into the building. All those things are important design aspects to make sure you create a pedestrian street, a street that people want to be on. And I think sketching really helps you look at all those things and understand how the pieces fit, and the new pieces that you're designing will fit into all that and help create this street, help create this place that people want to be. And so that's the importance, I think, of looking today at the buildings downtown and how they fit and how we might add to that, and being able to observe all that as part of the sketching process.
We're going to start a sketch today, and we've picked a location on Park Boulevard here. And the idea is to take in a streetscape and to work from a one-point perspective. And we want to keep things loose. The idea is really to get across some notions about how the city is put together try to express some of the dynamic qualities of being downtown and sketching and so forth. Mike, any thoughts on that?
When you're down on the street and you're sketching, you see what is there. You see what could be there and how you can make it better or improve it or fix problems, because you're observing and you're taking that time to observe what is happening on the street and what could be and what should be. And it's also fun to sketch.
First thing I'm going to do is establish a vanishing point. That's one of those key elements of a one-point perspective. And a vanishing point is basically that location in the distance where my eye would go if you project it from my eye. So I'm sitting a couple feet above street level here, so my vanishing point relative to the urban context is fairly low. We've got a couple very tall buildings in the picture. We've got some mid-rise and lower buildings, and setting up that vanishing point is so critical to getting the view right. So I'm going to start with the vanishing point and a horizon line, which would be that distant horizontal line from which we'll work. Often when I sketch with students, one of the most difficult things is to understand that the vanishing point is going to be low because it's going to be at a pedestrian level. And sitting down today, it's even lower than it would normally be. So we're going to continue on here. Laura is working along with me as you are, hopefully.
Hi, Kurt. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm working along in the comfort of my office. I want to take a moment to talk about the photo that you and I are going to be working from versus the real life that Kurt is seeing.
Here is our photo, but with the full tops of the buildings showing. The one we are drawing from is cropped somewhere around here. Doesn't this photo look crazy busy? So many lines going everywhere.
Let me do a quick demonstration to help you see it simplified. Really, urban buildings are often just boxes. Kurt's going to help us find the horizon line, our eye level line, and the vanishing point. And then he's going to show us how to draw the buildings. Think of the buildings as those boxes. There's the front of the box. Kind of can't see it off the photo. And then the sides of the box recede back to that vanishing point. A logical mind might say, wait, that sketch looks like a trapezoid. But that's the magic of perspective. Yes, it's a cube or a rectangular prism, but we see the sides receding back to the vanishing point. So there's our first box, the building on the corner. Here's the tall box back there. Again, the top of the building is going to angle down to that vanishing point, and the bottom of it angles up to the vanishing point, and then we see the face of the building. Oops, I forgot that side. There, another box. Then there'll be some smaller boxes in between, the tops going back to the vanishing point, the bottom along the street, going up to the vanishing point. These smaller buildings that we don't quite see. There's this one way in the background. Follows the same rules. Things that are above our eyes will go down to the vanishing point, and things that are below our eye level are going up to the vanishing point. We have some more buildings on this side, though we don't really include them in our sketch, but let me just draw them in so that you understand what you're seeing. More boxes over there. And then that horizon line becomes a little more apparent, and so do some of the sidewalks. There are trees in here that are just, think of them like blobs. And there are the simple boxy shapes of our buildings. We don't need much detail to show the shapes of the buildings, and we've cut out a lot of the clutter, unless you want to show the clutter, unless you feel like, and that's your choice to go back in and add some of those details. On the face of the building, they're horizontal, and on the sides of the buildings, they always go back to the vanishing point. But that's your choice. How much information do you need to show?
I'm on the east side of Park Boulevard. I'm not sketching as if I was in the middle of the street because I'm mostly focused on buildings on the west side of the street. So I'm gonna line up. I'm gonna start with a vertical line, light line here, and a horizontal, the horizon line, and where those two intersect, that's going to be my vanishing point, and that's going to be the most important spot on the whole page, because all of the lines that converge north-south on that end up at that vanishing point. So that's where I want to begin. First thing I notice is that I'm a little inside of the edge of the sidewalk. If I was right on the edge of the sidewalk, that vertical line that converges at the vanishing point would be where my line would be. Instead, I'm slightly off of it, so I'm going to start by sketching in this edge. I'm going to come over even further and begin to pick out the planted area here with the gravel and the succulent plants in it. Again, coming back to that vanishing point. And notice these are loose lines. I adjust them as I need to go. You're going to see a lot of adjustment as we work our way through the sketch, and that's perfectly fine. That's how we want this to happen. I'm going to set myself another horizontal datum, which will be the edge of the street, where the curb is and the street begins here. And we'll wait for the trolley to pass. And I've added two horizontal lines to the sketch. The first is the curb line on this side. The other is the curb line across the street. And notice how narrow the street is, because visually, when I look at that, what I see of F Street is very little because I'm down so low. So I've got now, I'll round the corners here to acknowledge the fact that we've got curbs in place. So I've got the start of the street edge with me at this point looking towards this scene. Now, obviously we want to get the other side of the street into the picture as well. So working from that vanishing point again, I'm going to take a good guess at my distance and plot that out. And as you can tell, one of the fun things and challenging things about sketching in a downtown urban environment is all the activity. We've got trolleys coming by constantly, pedestrian, bicyclists, and that's just, that's in the nature of things. So you don't worry about it, you go with the flow. If you don't hear me talking at some point, that's probably because there's some truck or trolley going by making noise. Perfectly okay.
I think that's a very important point. I think that if you were doing this, you could take a picture of it, a photograph, and you'd be done in 5 seconds. But by sketching, you understand all those pieces that are out there forming the context. The trolleys, the cars, the people, the noise, the sounds. And I think that's really an important part of sketching. It's not only visual, it's the mental things that you observe that are happening around you.
Absolutely, absolutely right. So we've got the edge of F and Park. Here's Park Street going into the page. Here is F running horizontally along the page, just the basic outlines. And I'm spending time on this because it's so important, as I said before, to get that point of view just right. You want that in the proper location, and it's going to be low. We're going to be spending a lot of time looking up from that point, but we want that vanishing point to be appropriately low because we're down at this pedestrian level. Now, I've got the street here. I'm even going to stretch that out a little bit. I've got my other curb of F, and it comes and turns in a corner, and I'm highlighting those just so you can follow along with those. So I'm starting to lay in the elements of the street. I'm bringing the other side, turning up that edge. So now you get the layout of the street. We've got Park Boulevard running into the page. We've got F Street running across the page. I've got a good grounding here because I've laid out the streets. And a lot of this is simply making a visual judgment about it. Take your time. Sometimes it really helps to kind of squint and block out all the detail. I'm not worried about these plants. I'm not worried about the street signs. I'm not worried about a whole lot of things right now, just to get things laid out. Now, the main focus of this sketch will be the street wall here and the buildings in that. We've got quite a variety. We've got a building of 7 stories here on the corner. We've got a couple 3-story, 2- and 3-story buildings. Then we've got a high-rise residential tower, a new one, and so on. So the variety is something that I'm going to try to capture because it is sort of up and down. And I can set a mark for myself at the corner. If I look at the corner of this building and lay that on my page, it's sitting somewhere about right here. So I can draw a vertical. The verticals are accurate in a 1-point perspective like this. And I also want to pay attention to what's down at the other end of the street. And we've got another tall building in the far distance, partially obscured by trees, and that's okay. We're gonna work around that. That sits just to the left, as I view it, of my vanishing point. So I'm going to start to lay that in here, put that about right here. It's not one of those urban sounds again. It's not terribly tall, but it does have a presence, and I'm just going to block that out really lightly for right now because I'm interested in getting the tall building in. Now, one of the things you may start to notice, because I've turned my page horizontally, I'm not going to get all of that tall new building in the picture. I'm going to get maybe a little bit more than half. That's fine. That's what I'll focus on. I won't worry about that. So I bring that edge down. I'm guessing relative to the building in the background about where that should be. I'm going to define the baseline of these, again from my vanishing point. They're sitting on the sidewalk. It's very low. Now I want to spend a little bit of time at the lower level here. I've got 3-story buildings and some special things happening with the tall buildings that form a kind of lower street edge. So once again, I'm going to pick up a line from my vanishing point and start to lay those out. In the distance, there's a small building. It's got some interesting things going on at the roof line. We just see it peeking out. I'm not going to worry about any of that detail at this point, other than to get it into the picture. Another one next to it. The tops of those buildings all need to come down to my vanishing point, so I pay attention to that. and that more or less carries a line up the street to a small gray building that sits next to this taller one on the corner. And I'm going to start to put that into the picture. There are other buildings next to it. They're lower, they're behind the trees. I'm not so worried about them. The trees are actually going to obscure some of this, and that's perfectly okay. But I'll get them in there. I'm going to need to make an adjustment in my picture because I'm realizing I set up my corner here, and I think that's too close. So I'm gonna bring that line back down. I'm gonna back my corner up. I'm gonna back this a little bit down the street and create a new edge for this building. So I'm improvising as I go to make sure I get everything in the right spot. We'll wait for the drawing. One of the things that interests me about the building on the corner is how that white frame is used to sort of mark where the corner of that building is. So I want to make sure that comes across, and I'm going to focus on that for a moment and spend a little bit of time there because that's an important part of the composition. I go back from time to time, make sure my lines are accurate relative to the vanishing point. You'll notice how much lead is collecting there because everything is depending on that point. And I'm setting out the frame of this building. There are balconies that sit out from that. They extend into that. I'm going to try to sort of subdivide that facade so that I get the balconies in place, and there are, down to this lower line, there are 5 of those. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, I'm going to try to work off of my vanishing point. I'm projecting lines. They're radiating up in the page to get the idea of the eye being drawn down the street. I'm not going to worry too much about those right now, other than to sketch them in very quickly. Because that's part of the detail that if I get a chance, I'll come back to later. And I've adjusted the corner a little bit more. I don't think I've got it yet in the right spot. Now I do. So I'm adjusting things, revising as I go for the needs of the picture and as I see more and as things begin to lay out. So we'll spend a few more minutes on the sketch, but one of the things I'm sure you're noticing already is we're not close to being done. And that's okay. When I sketch in the urban environment, I'm trying to pick up a few key ideas, a few notions that I want to commit to memory, and if I sketch them, I remember them much more effectively than if I simply photograph them. And I'm not worried about trying to show balconies and individual windows and doors and so forth. This is a very, very quick sketch. And actually, I think some of the most compelling sketches architects do are those things they do on the run, where they're taking a few minutes in an environment like this to jot some ideas down on paper. So I'll show you in the next few minutes some of the things I'm going to try to capture and highlight, and what I'm not going to worry too much about. As I said before, I like this kind of composition of high, low, middle height buildings. So I'm going to emphasize by picking it out in a heavier line the sort of profile that I get when all these buildings come together. Now I lose some of that in the trees, and the trees are going to have a role to play in all this, and I'm going to pick up the very tall building that, notice, just runs off the page. We're not going to worry about any of that today, no problem, and bring up the other buildings down the street. So I've picked up some of the profiles that I want on the street. I've got then the smart corner building in the background. I'm going to put that in. It's got those distinctive angled balconies. I'm just going to throw a little bit of detail in to highlight that one. I'm not going to worry about it. So what am I going to do on the right side of the page? Well, one of the reasons I picked this view was we've got street trees along that edge, and I'm going to let that first tree and the group of them on this side of Park Boulevard be the bookend to frame the composition from this side. Looking at the trees from here, I see that the very top of them sort of aligns with the building in the distance, the so-called smart corner building. They extend out and cover part of the building. So I'm going to start to just very loosely sketch in that edge, because I want to use the edge of those trees to limit what the page shows. And now I'm coming in, I'm just doing some shading to show the trees on that edge as a way to finish my composition on the east side of the street. I'll probably leave that right there for now. There are trees on the other side. They have their own role to play. They form a bit of an edge. They do obscure some of what's around them. So I'm going to lightly put these in. And look how loose I'm trying to be with the trees here as well. They extend down the street. They're a little bit lighter, so my shading's going to be pretty loose, pretty light. They've got trunks that appear here and there. I'm going to make sure to put those into the picture. And finally, I've got one right here at the corner. It sits in front of the edge of the corner building. It's got a slightly kind of pear shape to it, a little bit offset. I'm going to put that in as well. Sketched very lightly, some highlights where shadows would be. And one of the things I'm trying to show with these is that the trees start to help define that street edge. There are even a few way down the street here that are going to get sketched in very, very lightly and very indistinctly as part of that scene. And Mike, why do we have street trees in the first place?
I think the street trees are very important for a number of reasons. One, they're pretty, they beautify an area, but they're also very good for the climate because they suck up the toxic materials, the pollution, and clean it. But also importantly, as you see people walking down the street, it's comforting to walk. The shade is very important to the quality of the environment. And I think that's one of the things that's important about the exercises. Kurt said you may not be able to finish the entire drawing to the detail that a photograph would, but I have a better understanding of what makes the urban composition, how you design for it, how things fit, and you'll never look at an intersection the same way again.
Right. So at this point, I'm going to wrap up. I could do much more with this picture. I could put the grid of the tall building in. I could add the balconies for the building on the corner here. There's a lot of detail this doesn't show. I might even just begin to suggest some of it. The tall building grid that I look at is represented largely head on, so it's going to look like something of a grid, and I could start to lay in those lines. They're fairly narrow. Again, I'm eyeballing it. They go up the page. I'm taking advantage of the fat lead of this pencil. Notice I didn't do anything with a sharpened pencil, which allows me to keep some of this stuff a little bit looser. We've got verticals in there, lighter. We've got the edge along the street, which is responding to the vanishing point. So that does something very different. I'm not even going to try to get into depicting each of those little balconies that stick out on those edges, along that edge. That's a sketch or a detail for another day. So I can begin to fill in these pieces, but only after I've got the profile and the basic massing of the scene in place. And so I'm willing always to take the time to get those basic steps in place, because that's really the important part of an urban sketch like this. And if I get to some of the other detail later on, wonderful. If I don't, I've still learned a lot from taking on this view, from looking closely at the urban environment, thinking about things like the street wall that Mike has mentioned, and committing something to memory through the act of drawing. One last thing I'll mention, we're working in pencil today. Sometimes if the pencil's soft enough, you can really use the side of the pencil to add tone. I'm going to just highlight, for the purpose of discussion, a little bit of the building in the distance. I smudge that up with my finger. It gives me a nice light gray, very indistinct, very loose, but that's sort of been the theme with the sketch today. Keep it loose, make it easy on yourself, have fun doing it. Don't worry about the details. Don't worry about the precision. That's really not the point of the exercise here. Mike, I'm happy to give you the last word on this segment.
I just think, watching the way you described how to draw, sketch the scene we're seeing, really, again, maybe I'm being redundant and repeating myself, but it really helps you focus and see what is actually out here. And you don't do that. And many people don't see what's around them and don't understand the context. And I think sketching is a wonderful tool for really understanding where you are and what could be, as well as being a wonderful therapy, because it's a lot of fun to do.
Now, I've finished my sketch today, 15-20 minutes on the street, which is what I intended to do. And sometimes I leave it at that. But other times, then I will take that sketch back to my desk, back to a comfortable drawing place, and I'll continue to work on it. If I had more time sitting there on Park Boulevard, sure, I would finish the sketch. So we're going to continue on here. Laura is working along and starting to fill in some of the detail, add some body to the picture, fill in a few pieces, as we'll see, that I didn't get to. So here we're enhancing what's already there. Now you'll have noticed at this point, for instance, that I drew a lot of lines. I didn't erase anything, but we may want to do that because, as you'll note, there is an open spot on that corner building where the balconies start and stop. And so she's going in right now to add that and to add a little more detail and definition to those projected balcony edges. So this will help set up the element in the foreground, that important building on the corner. And
one of many instances where we might want to come in and erase some things, lighten things up, get some lines out of the way that maybe were there initially, just as guidelines, or even correct things. I'm constantly correcting projection lines and making them more accurate and so forth. And sometimes you simply want to clean things up a little bit, and that's what the old eraser is really good at doing. So here she's turned the corner, adding detail along that edge, starting to put some definition in for that brown paneling that sits just above the first floor line. And if you sort of squint at the image, you'll notice that there's a dark band of space between the paneling and the glass that really helps anchor and situate the lower part of the building. It extends out a little bit from it. It becomes an important part of what marks the corner of that street intersection. So here, adding in the continuation of the balcony edges along that way. They're following the projection lines, so they're getting steeper as you go up, because they're all relating back to that vanishing point, and then carrying them down F Street, roughly horizontally as she's drawn here, to turn the corner and begin to show some detail on those edges as well. One of the things you'll have noticed in doing this is that because we're looking up at those balconies, we're seeing the bottoms of them. We're seeing quite a bit of the underside. We don't see the top of them because they're well above us. So we want to represent those sorts of things and make sure that we're getting across the height of this building and emphasizing where we are as urban observers relative to that height. So here's the rest of the corner going in. She's nicely laid out the bottom of the building, so we're defining that edge on the street and grounding it at the sidewalk, an important thing to do. So it already feels better to get that into the picture, to get that into the sketch, adding detail where doors and windows are with vertical lines. Most of those are verticals that stop at some of those projecting horizontal bands. So that's being represented as well, and fleshing out the details along the way. So we turn the corner on that side. Now we can look at the other side of the street. Something I really didn't get into much at all. Same rules apply with the vanishing point. We want to make sure that the top of the buildings on our side of the street are depicted accurately. So she's sketched those in lightly, and now is framing the picture, which is a kind of visual reminder to herself where she can stop rendering and shading things. Useful thing to do. And sometimes it's kind of a strategic thing because it makes things more manageable. You don't worry about having to fill out the whole page. You've got a smaller area to cover. And sometimes psychologically, that's just a really helpful thing to do. Now, the buildings on that far right-hand side, as you can see from the photo or from our discussion in the field, they're in shadow, so things are dark. And she's showing that dark. She's got shade on the street because we've got those all-important street trees that Mike and I talked about. Want to differentiate a little bit in tone between the tree and the edge of the building. They're both very dark, but we're going to lighten one up and darken the other just to get that contrast, a little bit of artistic license there. We get to do those things because, hey, it's our sketch. And a little more detail on the tree. It's leafy. We want to give it some volume. And we've really now defined that streetscape pretty effectively. And there's some nice parts down there near the vanishing point where you even see a little bit of sky, you see space between buildings and trees. You get a sense of the distance and the powerful perspective into the page towards that vanishing point. That is what you get in the urban environment and sketching in what we sometimes call the urban jungle. So great way to finish this off. Thanks to Laura for filling in and adding her own touches.
Thanks for joining me today for this version of KidSketch. I hope you got something out of it. I hope this will inspire you to get out in the environment, sit down, sketch. Don't worry about whether the lines are straight and everything's neat on the page. We architects and sketchers have good days and bad days, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to change things and adjust as you go. I hope all that came out. The important point is to see things, to have a chance to observe, and have a good time doing it. So long until next time, happy sketching.